Good evening, friends. I am Zeb Eller, president of Gratz College. It is my dutiful privilege to welcome you to the Saul Feinstone Memorial Lecture on the meaning of freedom, now one of several key programs within Gratz College's Center for Holocaust Studies and Human Rights. Like the center, the aim of this lecture is to invite champions of democracy to think aloud and teach us about the contours of freedom. The Saul Feinstone Memorial Lecture was first delivered in 1970. Representative Madeleine Dean of Pennsylvania's 4th Congressional District is the latest leader to address our community in this very capacity. We have been blessed with many distinguished lecturers over the past decade. Last year, our Feinstone lecturer was the Honorable Elizabeth Holster, who taught us much about Nazi war criminals in the United States. Other lecturers include the late U.S. Representative William Gray III in 1991, and even before that, the former U.S. Senator from Delaware, Joe Biden, who in 1982 spoke on Israeli democracy and American interests in the Middle East. I'm not suggesting a causal link, but I'm not ruling it out. I hasten to thank Co-Chifa and Megan Janison, leaders within Representative Dean's office, for helping to coordinate tonight's lecture. They, like the Congresswoman, are models of civic engagement and ethical leadership. It is my honor to convene this evening's program and to hand it off to my colleague, Rabbi Lance Sussman, to introduce our distinguished lecturer. Rabbi Sussman is a past board chair and faculty member at Gratz College. In his rabbinate and nearby Reform Congregation Knesset Israel, and through his significant scholarship, Rabbi Dr. Sussman has championed and explored freedom within the arenas of religion, education, and social justice. He is an exemplar of everything that Gratz's current founding stakeholders campaign hopes to accomplish on behalf of the Center for Holocaust Studies and Human Rights. He is therefore the altogether right person to introduce and dialogue in the 2022 Saul Feinstone Memorial Lecture. Renewed thanks to you, Rabbi Lance Sussman.
Thank you, Dr. Elif. I certainly hope my board of trustees at the synagogue heard that introduction. That was perfect. Thank you so much.
My board too.
Your board too. So it is a true pleasure and honor now for me to give you a little bit of biographical information on our Congresswoman. Madeleine Dean was born and raised nearby here to Glenside, Pennsylvania. She graduated from LaSalle University, just down the road, and earned her law degree at Widener University, a little further down the road. Madeleine then returned home to this area and practiced law with the Philadelphia trial lawyers, and went on to open up a 3-woman law firm in Glenside. While raising her 3 sons, Madeleine changed career paths to become a professor of writing at LaSalle University, and I can always use a good editor. In 2012, Madeleine successfully ran for state representative in the 153rd district. In the legislature, Madeleine was appointed to Governor Wolf's Commission for Women, co-founded the gun safety group PA Safe, and was an outspoken leader on progressive issues. In 2018, Madeleine was elected to represent Pennsylvania's 4th District, Montgomery and Berks counties in the 116th Congress. In Washington, Madeleine serves on the powerful Judiciary and Financial Services Committees, seen you on TV many times, championing progressive priorities like public education, combating addiction, equal rights, access to healthcare, protecting the environment, ethics, criminal justice reform, gun violence prevention, and much more. In 2019, Madeleine was elected vice chair of the Bipartisan Women's Caucus. Congresswoman Dean, welcome to Gratz College, and we are looking forward to your introductory remarks.
Oh, thank you so much, Rabbi. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Mr. President. Well, it is a particular honor to be with you tonight. To the folks in the room and the folks on the Zoom, thank you very much. for inviting me. It's an extraordinary honor to be in my hometown neighborhood because I was born and raised in Glenside, the heart of the universe, center of the universe is what we call it. And now to serve in Congress. I serve, as you know, the 4th Congressional District, which is Montgomery and Berks counties. I want to thank the organizers for putting this together, for giving me the honor of having a chance to have my voice heard on the meaning of freedom in this incredible lecture series. I'm a little now incredibly intimidated by what you just said in terms of who has been here before, but I am excited for this discussion. It's good to be with students and professors and colleagues and friends and neighbors, frankly. I'm honored to offer these remarks for the Saul Feinstone Memorial Lecture of the meaning of freedom. Oh my goodness, isn't that something we are examining very, very closely here in the United States and around the world? And the question, how do we build those bridges to a better future? And the answer is suggested in this memorial lecture, which it is through civic engagement. So thank you for your extraordinary civic engagement and for being a part of this community. In particular, thank you, President Zeb Elif. Thank you so much for welcoming me and wanting me to be part of this conversation. Rabbi Lance Sussman, oh my gosh, you and your lifetime of inspiration and service to our community and a much greater community than just even KI. I thank you very much for being inspiring to me. Director Naomi Hausman, there she is. Thank you so much for inviting me and including me in your important work. I guess I don't need to tell you, we've learned an awful lot over the last 2 years. We've learned one thing that I've learned immediately, we all learned, painfully so, how interconnected we are, how interdependent we are on one another, and what a struggle and a challenge it was within our own families, within our own organizations, within our own churches, communities, and schools, to remain interconnected as we all were sent home and on Zooms and all the rest. We are interconnected. It is a part of our human quality, and that interdependence is an absolute beautiful gift of our humanity. The other thing that we have learned, sadly, in the last couple of years is something I didn't think was really so true: the fragility of democracy. I certainly got involved in politics and public service because I believe in democracy. I believe in public service. I believe in lifting up the needs of others and trying to solve problems and to do the right by others. But I have to tell you, obviously, over the course of these last 2 years, I saw just how fragile our democracy is. And I am reminded that it's on all of us, not just elected leaders, not just civic leaders. It's on every single citizen to make sure we lift up and protect our democracy. It is not a given. It is not a fixture. It's not permanent. It's up to human beings, citizens, to make sure we protect it. I've been thinking an awful lot in this question of freedom and justice and democracy about Madeleine Albright, with whom I share the spelling of my first name. And she once wrote me a note. I had the chance to get to know her a little bit. And she once wrote me a very sweet thank you note for a visit she had at our home. And she signed it, "The Other Madeleine." Save that, you might imagine. She, of course, was a trailblazer. First female Secretary of State, 1997, becoming the highest ranking woman in American government at that time, ever in history. She was an example to me and to so many others. I had the chance to work with her, the privilege to work with her, helping save someone who was a political prisoner, and she guided me in trying to help this person, and we were successful. A few weeks ago, I attended her funeral, and like so many people, I've been reflecting a lot on her life's work, and especially her poignant words in her final book, warning us that democracies are fragile, and yet they are resilient, a line she learned from her father. As a child, Secretary Albright and her family fled a war-torn Eastern Europe, and the horrors there influenced her tenacious dedication to our country, this country, that she was so proud to be a citizen of, and democracies around the world. In her public life, she would talk about her father's statement. When they came here, he was a diplomat, and he said to her as a young child and throughout her life, "I worry that Americans take their democracy for granted, and they must never do that." Boy, oh boy, does that ring so true in these recent months and years. She believed that democracies are fragile, which is why she dedicated her life to protecting this democracy and lifting up others around the world. The fragility of democracies is an unnerving truth that we all face. We've seen it in recent months, the atrocities in Ukraine. It's not a war, it's a series of war crimes. Crimes against humanity, crimes against a young democracy, one that I think we can all take inspiration from. Putin has committed and is committing horrifying crimes that has horrified the world. And we would not have thought possible in this century. It seems so much like the last century and what my parents would tell me of World War II. And I am proud that the world is very united in the support for Ukraine and its people. We have seen the bravery, the dignity, the determination of the president and the citizens to protect their young democracy. There's so much we can learn from those people. The fragility of our democracy is not just a threat across the ocean, of course. It's right here at home. Sadly, it's been sown. The cracks in our democracy have been sown through some very serious misinformation and frankly hate. It really strikes me that some of the information that has been going on, and this is not a one-day event, this is something that has been built by a certain number of people, and it is steeped in a failure to recognize the truth, a failure to say, I have to speak the truth, especially if I'm an elected official. It is my obligation, it is my oath to speak the truth. Even if it's inconvenient, even if it's painful, I have to speak the truth. But we don't see that among all leaders. Misinformation and hate are rampant in our lives. I know Gratz is employed in the obligation of making sure we push back on that stuff. On January the 6th, 2021, I was in the Capitol on the day of the insurrection. A horrifying day. I still have a hard time believing it happened, as maybe ridiculous as that is. It just seems impossible that on that day, Americans came and attacked the citadel of our democracy and attacked Americans, attacking Americans, using the American flag to beat Americans, to beat police officers in search for elected leaders in hopes of maybe hanging one of them or killing others. It is incredible to think that happened. And it happened somehow on our watch. But we must not be quiet about it. I thought that tragedy would actually bring us together as a country. I remember I was in the safe room for hours with hundreds of other members of Congress and some staff and even a couple of journalists. And I thought, surely this will do it. This will bring us all together to recognize what is true, what is fiction, who we should be walking behind or walking with, and who we should reject noisily, not silently, but noisily. And I was wrong. We still face misinformation, lies, extremism, bigotry, anti-Semitism, hate. Sadly, those things are still there. And then, of course, we also struggle with partisanship. I know it will take time for our nation to heal, and I'm not sure exactly what it will take, but I'm pretty sure I follow the lead of Madeleine Albright's words, because while her father told her democracies are fragile, he also taught her they are resilient. And I believe that about our American democracies. I believe we will come closer together. We will hear, we will heal, we will recognize the truth. Because if we don't get democracy right, none of the other issues is going to matter. We're not going to be able to hand this beautiful democracy off to our children and our grandchildren. I now have 4 grandchildren, so it's really my mission is to see the world through their eyes and their future. We must be resilient, because if we don't get it right, nothing else matters. Democracy is the platform that lifts up all other issues in our nation. So I think it's up to us. And there are other challenges to our freedoms that have been raised in the course of the last couple of weeks, particularly last week, that I have a feeling in this conversation we will get to. What you're doing at this institution is so powerfully important. You're teaching, you're leading, you're helping folks learn what is at stake what matters, our communities, our families, our enterprise, whatever it happens to be. And so I'm certain that many of your students are civically engaged, thus this beautiful lecture series. And I hope with that engagement, many of them are engaged so much that they're working on campaigns for worthy candidates. I'm not saying which party the person has to be, but candidates who believe in the truth and lifting up public service in an ethical way, filled with integrity and service, not selfishness. I hope many of your students will maybe run for office. It would be a really important thing to do, armed with the education that they get here. I really believe we all have the power and the responsibility to shape our democracy. I think about it, I think love is something inherent. It's in every one of us. I see it in my grandchildren. Hate is not inherent. And I remember Eboo Patel, a philosopher and writer, said, it matters who gets to the microphone first. So thank you, Rabbi. Thank you for getting to the microphone first. Thank all of you for getting to the microphone first, of young people and maybe not so young people who want to learn the truth. It matters. So it's important to get to the mic, that you share Gratz College's tradition of lifelong learning and acceptance, of informing us all of our history, of equal rights for women, which is embedded in your college, so that we are not doomed to repeat the past. Your work embodies Tikkun Olam, repairing the world. Thank you for what you do to bring our world together, to build bridges that will create greater unity and less division. Together, I am confident we will repair the world alongside your students. And with that, I thank you for your attention and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman.
Thank you, Rabbi. And please, if it's okay with you, call me Mad or Madeleine.
Okay.
And I'll still call you Rabbi.
Okay. My kids call me Rabbi when they're really angry at
Oh,
me,
do
so I'll have to interpret it, okay? I want to thank you for coming to the microphone here and in Washington and many times addressing the whole nation. We have an important topic tonight. It's timely, it's really urgent, about civic engagement and ethical leadership. What could be more important broadly in our society at this time? In preparation for this evening, the members of the Gratz community were solicited for questions, and as you can imagine, many questions did come in, and what I tried to do was synthesize them so that the different areas, topics would be reflected, although not necessarily the specific word choice. We wanted to make sure we got to certain topics tonight. And I also looked into this concept of civic engagement and found that there are dimensions to it. There's civic engagement, there's political engagement, there's electoral engagement. And I was really taken just now in your wonderful opening remarks. You used the phrase, taking care of democracy. That when you said that, I said, I love that. When you said that, what are you bringing to it? What do you mean as our Congresswoman? What does it mean to take care of democracy in the United States today?
Well, I now really recognize, I almost picture it as a fragile thing, that our democracy, as I said, I don't know if you share this experience, but I'm 62 years old. And for the first 6 decades of my life, I took, maybe not full 6, but I took for granted that this special experiment was so firmly entrenched in all of us and in this country, and so prized by all of us that it was strong and would beat back against these forces of evil, frankly. But now I feel like it's almost like the beautiful Easter eggs that Ukrainians prize and paint. It is very fragile and very valuable and so beautiful, and we have an obligation to protect it. We often use the expression, we're here to create a more perfect union, knowing that it's a sort of an infinite process. For whatever centuries this country exists, we're always going to be trying to make a more perfect union. But we've seen that union really be brittle in the course of these last several years. So for me, I just think of the beautiful, fragile nature of democracy and that it must be held in every one of our hands and lifted up for the good that it is.
We know that in our country today, in our society, there are many very loud voices, but there are also many people who seem to have been silenced. It's not a new theme. What do you think are some of the barriers to civic engagement?
You remember from Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, he spoke about the appalling silence of good people. Sometimes I'm in Congress and I would not say, everybody on one side of the aisle is terrible. They're simply not. I have some really terrific colleagues on the other side of the aisle from me. But I am baffled by the silence of many members. Why don't they speak up and say you are spewing disinformation, misinformation, indecency, and hate? If you take a look at my work on judiciary, sadly, judiciary is one of the worst examples of that kind of spewing of disinformation. And so I'm so proud of, for example, Liz Cheney. She stood up. She's telling the truth at great risk to herself. It's not convenient. It's not comfortable. I'm sure she's having a devil of a re-election, but she stood up and held on to the truth, where others stood up and immediately said the truth and then reversed course because they made calculations. So these are those who I think have been quite hypocritical. Calculations of their own preservation of power and position and re-elections and things like that. Liz Cheney didn't do that. She decided she was going to stick by the truth. She and I don't agree on policy matters very much, but we agree on the most essential thing, which is the rule of law matters, democracy matters, the truth about what the heck just happened matters. So there are these two different versions. To your point about the silence, I don't know. Maybe you have the answers better than I, because there are some very good people in that party, for example, who are too silent. I don't know what the answer is. I'd hate to think it's all just to be reelected.
Just a historical footnote before another question. Before Dr. King spoke in front of the Lincoln Memorial, a rabbi spoke. His name was Joachim Prince. And at one point in his life, he had been a rabbi in Berlin. And he felt very much obliged to support Dr. King in the civil rights movement. He gave a spectacular speech that is not well known, but it's recorded. You can find it on YouTube or wherever you want to look for it. And he said in his speech there that the enemy of evil, the lack of good, is not evil, it's silence. And he said it in a way that I have never heard anybody repeat as powerful. I think it's something we need to remind ourselves again and again. Thank you for saying it. With respect to civic engagement, a question that comes up in our home, and it's not one of the big headline issues, but pops up around the corner. I'm from that generation that just missed Vietnam, and the national conscription system was disbanded, and it was never replaced with any kind of national service. What do you think of that? Do you think we're not what we should be, in part because we don't have a requirement of young people? In Israel, young people have to serve their country.
Mm-hmm.
Here, it's optional. Does that hurt us?
I think it does. I might be in a similar age bracket as you. I'm the youngest of 7 children. I have 5 older brothers, and my eldest 2 brothers served in the Navy during the Vietnam War, one stateside, and my eldest brother, Bob, 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. And I'm very proud of their service. And of course, you know what happened during Vietnam and how shamefully we did not welcome those veterans home as we should have. We're just now trying to make up for it. But I actually think of myself. I wish I had served. I wish we did have some level of service, whether it was mandatory or just incredibly encouraged, a year's worth of service, that would revive that commitment to this country and democracy. When you think of the small percentage of people who actually serve, live, and die, I was just down at the Veterans Affairs in Philadelphia, and you just think of the very small number of folks who serve, the burden entirely on them. No wonder the rest of us might take democracy and this country and our precious freedoms for granted. I wish there were some sort of a corps, like Kennedy's Peace Corps, that was domestic service to our country. Maybe then we would all, as I say, I wish I had served. I didn't even consider it because our family went through such turmoil with 2 sons in the Navy. My mother said when the draft came in, my third brother drew a number that was very high, meaning he would not be subject to the draft. My mother said, if Michael winds up being drafted also, I won't let him go. I've had it. So there was such turmoil in our house over the Vietnam War. My mother's terrible fears over my brother in Vietnam and fears for his life. But I wish I had served, and I wish we would have some greater service throughout this country.
Well, you are serving now, and we're grateful for that. And you do have the microphone, and we're grateful for that. Holding the mic, which forms of civic engagement would you like to encourage? If you could have a press conference and they were all there, all of that. America, we need civil engagement, and we need it in X, Y, and Z. What's your dream?
My dream is that young people really learn what our Constitution is. I guess I really learned about our Constitution because I went to law school. But I wonder if we really understand the rights, privileges, the obligations, all of the things that went into the founding of this country, the fighting for the founding of this country, and also understand the flaws of it. And that's why we're constantly striving for a more perfect union. You don't have to look any further than last week's leaked opinion by Justice Alito. Do people understand how the law is made, what the Constitution actually says? That he writes that because abortion isn't in the Constitution, that therefore it's not an implied right or an unenumerated right. We need to understand our Constitution better. I remember during impeachment 1, the judiciary had a role to play, Intelligence Committee had a role to play, and we had an awful lot of hearings. I would hold the Constitution on my desk in those hearings, because what I couldn't stand was if we don't learn about it, we're not educated about it, then you can be incredibly misled. And there were folks who were misleading people about what is impeachment, what are our rights, what is the impeachment process, what is the obligation within it. Total disinformation, misinformation. And I once in a while would just read a segment of the Constitution as part of my getting to the mic. Number one, we have to teach young people, maybe some of us who've just taken it all for granted, what is the founding of this country all about? What are we trying to do? And get more people engaged, more people, asking the tough questions, requiring the truth of people. And of course, you can imagine, I think elections matter an awful lot.
Let's stick with elections. One way all of us who are citizens can engage is voting. And voting is a hot topic today. And there are questions about why don't more people vote? And there are challenges that saying that there are people who are voting who shouldn't be voting. What are your thoughts about voting in America today?
Well, there is absolutely no doubt that the last election was free and fair and had tremendous participation. I'm mighty proud of Montgomery County because we had terrific turnout and we made a difference in that election. I'm worried about this election cycle. I'm worried that people think, well, presidential election is really important. And after all, we did just go through insurrection, impeachment, those kinds of things. So people were motivated. I hope they're as motivated this time. I fear they won't be, particularly in the primary. I fear not enough people will come and be engaged. There is something that could change that with this, the argument over Roe could change that. But elections really matter at every single level. I'll never forget when I decided I wanted to get into public service, I took a course down at Penn Fell School of Government, took Ed Rendell's course. And at the end of the course, you can imagine at that point, I was about a 50-year-old woman in a sea of 24-year-olds. And so I'm sure Governor Rendell thought I was just auditing the course, but I was taking it for real. I wanted to educate myself about running for office. What does it mean? What does it take? How do you do it? And so I took the course, and at the end of it, I was asked to run for township commissioner in Abington. And so I met with the governor, and I said, Governor, would you do a headline for me? I'm going to have a fundraiser. He said, well, what are you running for? I said, township commissioner. And he looked at me, he said, oh, Madeleine, that would be unprecedented. The governor coming to a fundraiser for township commissioner. I said, but Governor, you taught us. If you fail to ask, the answer is always no. He said, oh my gosh, you got me. And so he came to, I often think of this night, he came to my house, our house in Jenkintown in Baderwood. And I thought, imagine how he must have been dreading the drive there, thinking, I can't believe I'm talking to a crowd for township commissioner. But he came in and he won the night because the theme was, I'm so glad you're here to support Madeleine for township commissioner because elections matter at every level. Township commissioner impacts your life. State legislator impacts your life. And he even argued more than Congress or the president. You know, elections matter at every level. So I wish we could get everybody to say this election matters. Who's on the ballot? It's really going to matter.
Who do you think's not voting?
I worry, and you could tell me better because you're closer to the students. I worry that young people have an apathy. I think it will be less as a result of recent events. But I worry that young people have an apathy. I worry that those who are marginalized have an apathy. They figure systems break. I'm not going to get represented anyway. I do worry about that. And I worry about people just being too doggone busy and chaotic in their own lives and worried about COVID and their future and jobs and educating their kids. I just wish we, every single one of us realized every single election matters and we all have to vote. But when I'm around young people, I get stirred up anytime I'm on a campus. I think there's hope. There's hope in the future because they get it.
What do you think is, we have an annual State of the Union. What do you think is the state of hate in America today? It seems to be rising, if not spiking, weaponized. What's happening out there?
Well, I was telling you about the Judiciary Committee. 2 weeks ago, we had Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas in front of us. And the performance on the other side of the dais against Secretary Mayorkas was so painful. They attacked him. They asked him questions that were filled with misinformation and then wouldn't let him answer. They attacked his nationality. He's a proud American citizen coming from Cuba. Talked about his immigrant roots and his family coming here. It was shameful. And my blood was boiling. I'm low on the dais. So by the time they get to my set of questions, each member is given 5 minutes to ask questions of whomever is in front of you. And my blood was just boiling at the indecency of the comments. And so this is my fear. What's the level of hatred? It's really high. And it reminded me of a speech that I really admire from a time before I was born. In 1950, Senator Margaret Chase Smith, US Senator, a woman, 1950, freshman senator in the midst of McCarthyism. And she sat on the floor, and the belief was if you're a freshman, you sit, you're quiet. Senator, imagine that, 6 years, sit and be quiet. And she just resisted that and thought, I cannot, to the point of silence, I cannot be silent. I won't do it. And so she stood on the floor of the Senate and delivered a beautiful speech called the Declaration of Conscience, in which she said, and she was a Republican, and she was talking about her Republican senators. And she said, I fear that my Republican senators will ride to victory on the 4 horsemen of calumny: hatred, bigotry, fear, I'm getting one wrong, and smear. And I said to Secretary, I quoted that in the hearing, and I said to Secretary Mayorkas, I said, sadly, I think the 4 horsemen are riding high in here today. The smear, the ignorance, the bigotry that is being spewed by elected leaders is absolutely stunning. And so I look to history to say, how do we break that fever? How do we decapitate those 4 horsemen that some are trying to ride to victory on? And I think it is people speaking up. I look back at the history. One of the people who spoke up and had enough at that time was Ronald Reagan, who said, I hate communism like everybody else, but this is not the way to victory. And others spoke up and spoke out. But we are in a fever pitch of hatred. It's popular. It sells. You see some of the folks who are spewing it. It keeps them raising extraordinary sums of money, keeps them in the limelight. I think of someone I don't even want to mention, but you can picture who I'm thinking. When she's done in Congress, what will she have to say she was proud of doing? Of course, she serves on no committees because she's been tossed off committees. But what are you there for? And when your day is done, if I'm done after this term, I hope I fought for meaningful things. If I get to serve another 10 years, I hope I fought for others and for meaningful things. What will somebody like that, who spews hatred and bigotry, go home and say, yeah, I feel good that I had that honor of serving in Congress? I don't know. I'd love your ideas on what's going to break the fever.
Well, I guess my question then is, when such people go home, they find allies. And yet we have a raging debate in the United States right now as to whether or not this animus, this hatred is simply hotheads with microphones, or whether it's systemic in our society, and that it is apparent and easily identified when certain, let's say, bad words are used, but it's less apparent when certain financial policies are followed or certain public health policies are not enacted. What are your feelings about this concept of systemic racism, systemic hatred in the United States? Is that an abstraction unworthy of public dialogue, or is that real?
No, I fear that racism is sadly beneath the surface, and I think it's just been scratched open. Some of these histories of bigotry, of racism, of anti-Semitism, they've been there, but some powerful people over the course of the last 6 years gave them voice and got away with it. Absolutely got away with it. I served under the previous administration for a couple of years, 2 years, I guess. And I remember our worry about the rise of white supremacy, of domestic terrorism connected with white supremacy. And in questioning the previous administration, they denied that it even existed, that it was a problem. Domestic terrorism, a problem in this country. Whether you talk about the attack on the synagogues, they literally denied it. So we're in a better way because we have an administration, we've been briefed on it, who actually gets it, the rise of domestic terrorism. Systemically, I think it's been there all along, and this is a sad series of spikes against the other. I hold out hope that we have a new administration. Elections matter. may some of these people be held to account for what they did. We're going to have the public hearings on January 6th. I hope America listens and figures out actually what happened and what culpability there is. But we have a long history of racism in this country, and it's up to us to move past it and to heal.
But us is often divided by states. And in some states today, you really cannot talk about systemic racism with kids. So what are we gonna do?
Oh my gosh. Back to education.
Mhm.
We have to educate our children fully without fear of saying what is very uncomfortable. That is our history, that is our past, it is our present now. Otherwise, it will be chronically our future. There's a hand in the back.
Well, we're gonna stick to the,
Stick to the script.
we stick to the, I'm summarizing, we received many,
I
many
see.
questions. I
Thank you.
apologize for that. I'd like to stick to the format for the time being. We'll see how we are at the end. The Jewish community has its own concerns. I know in the last 10 years, we have done things and gone to extraordinary measures. 1 mile north of here, up Old York Road, we added barriers that cars couldn't drive into our building and explode bombs. We went from a discussion about having uniform guards present, to which there was opposition, to having uniform guards with weapons, which is now present. And we added a security fee. Do you think that anti-Semitism in America has become an existential threat to the American Jewish community, or are we still dealing with basically weaponized extremists on the march? And has there really been a shift deep down in this society?
I do think it's an existential threat. I was in Israel recently before the invasion of Ukraine and had the chance to visit Yad Vashem. And just my breath, takes your breath away place. And as a footnote, I will say I came home and we have the slaughter in Ukraine, and I thought someday we will have another memorial place to recognize what is lost, who is lost. It is an existential threat. When you look at Yad Vashem and you see the campaign, the literature, the identifying Jews as a bug or as a reptile or something like that, that is nearly re-embraced, making Jews the other. I think it's mighty, mighty frightening. Tree of Life Synagogue attacked. To your point on the security that you have increased, forgetting the name of the rabbi, he was actually in front of our committee, who
Charlie.
took advantage of the security training and the grants that are available to places of worship in order to protect yourself. And how absurd it is that you would need to do that, that he would have had the attack on his own synagogue and walked himself through it and ended that without bloodshed. But it's in Texas. It's a stunning reality, but it is our reality. And again, it's about hatred. It's about teaching bigotry, anti-Semitism, and hatred. And we just have to keep pushing back.
Thank you for your heartfelt concerns and your empathy for our community. One of the questions that I saw over and over again when we solicited opinion for tonight's discussion was about Israel, of course, which is very important, high priority in the American Jewish community. For where you're sitting now in the United States Congress, what do you think is the level of support, bipartisan support for Israel in the United States Congress? And what are the dangers to the consensus, or what has been the consensus for a couple of decades now on American support of Israel?
Well, and I know this from going to Israel. that we are essential. America and our leadership, of course, our support, military, financial, our support is critically important. Talk about lifting up a democracy. That is our most powerful democratic partner. And so in Congress, it's really hard to tell you a good answer, to have my finger fully on the pulse. I know in my caucus, we're, I believe almost to a person, believe in the importance of our close relationship with Israel, of the importance of their democracy, and that the United States has a really critical role to play. Sadly, I think there's misinformation and a lack of understanding, and because it's a very complicated set of issues. But what I hope, I can't speak for everybody, what I hope is that there is still a chance for a two-state solution, so that Israel lives in peace and prosperity for all of its children and all of its families. But I fear, and you can tell me better, under the new coalition government, which is precarious as it is, and with what's going on in terms of settlements, that might be slipping away from possibility. But I believe that a vast majority, at least of the Democratic members, believe in lifting up the safety and security of Israel, all its people, but working our influence to try to move toward greater peace in that region. I went to Iron Dome. I was thinking about Israel, of course, with the military requests we have with Ukraine, the powerful need for Iron Dome and for protection of security. But so I don't have a good answer for you on all of Congress. I know what our belief is, and you see through our votes where our support is for Israel. And when we were there, it was impressed upon us that we are indispensable. The United States is indispensable to peace, ultimately, in Israel. And I hope we play that role and we play it well.
Do you think there's any real possibility of, let's say, a demilitarized Palestinian state? It seems that, in Israel itself, maybe there's been a little bit of slipping away from the two-state solution. Israel itself as a country has shifted to the right. It still officially embraces the two-state solution, but the concern in the two-state solution is then Israel is vulnerable if there is a Palestinian state next door, and it would only be acceptable if it was demilitarized. Do you hear voices that would agree with that scenario? And how could it ever be enforced?
I don't have an answer except to say in my recent trip, if it's just unsustainable as it is, even by demographics. I think the numbers are 6.9 million Palestinians, 6.4 million Israeli Jews. So the demographics are shifting. It cannot be sustained the way it is. I don't know if that's doable. 2 trips ago when I was in Israel, it was between, I guess Israel had already had 2 elections, Netanyahu, and it was summertime and they were anticipating the 3rd election with Benny Gantz. And so we met with Gantz, we met with Netanyahu, we met with Abbas, we met with everybody. And so we had a very long meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu, very big crowd, Democrats and Republicans, members of Congress, our spouses. It was a very interesting set of meetings. And so I thought as an icebreaker, I got my hand up and I got a question in. And so I said to Mr. Netanyahu, I said, he had a PowerPoint going on. I said, Mr. Netanyahu, do you know if you could get your PowerPoint to show the 4th Congressional District of Pennsylvania, you know what you'd see? And he said, no, what would I see? I said, you see Cheltenham High School, where you were graduated.
That's right.
And I thought that would be a nice icebreaker. He came back with, we beat you in football. I said, I went to Abington. I said, I went to Abington. He said, we beat you in football. I said, we beat you in basketball. But my point was to try to break the ice and then to say, what is your responsibility? What is your commitment to a two-state solution? And he's quite eloquent. He spoke for quite a while. But literally, while he said he implied he was for a two-state solution, it was a militarized state.
What do you think American Jews need to do to be a good friend to the state of Israel today? We have a changing demographic. We have a changing political landscape. We've had our traditional forces that have raised voices on behalf of Israel in Washington. Do we need to shift patterns, or will we keep working?
I would say with humility, I don't think that's my job to tell you. But I'll tell you, I'm a Catholic. I'm a practicing Catholic. We say that because we never quite get it right. So, but I prize my faith. And so my trips to Israel were really wonderful for me to see, the homeland of my own faith and to see the intersection of so many faiths. I loved my trip, and it did so much for me to see the places where Jesus walked and preached and died. So it was wonderful to me. And so with that in mind, I would not preach to you. I would say that for American politicians, maybe it would be so much, I don't know how to do this, but it would be so much better if there weren't sort of litmus tests. You see sort of AIPAC versus J Street. I wish there weren't an AIPAC versus J Street. I think you talk about a two-state solution, that might sound flip, but I wish we had one set of ideals and goals for Israel and America's role in that. I wish it weren't so tense. You either have to be this way or that way. I think the goal should be, what is the best thing we can do to support Israel and all of her beautiful people, and to encourage peace.
I gave a talk last Sabbath in the synagogue, that one of my takeaways from watching the news on Ukraine is the necessity of a strong military in Israel. They only get to lose once. That's it. That's the nature of the conflict there. And it's not that the Ukrainians were unprepared. History landed them in a certain spot, and watching the invasion of Ukraine has caused me to kind of double down in my own feelings about military support for Israel. I see you're wearing a Ukrainian flag with your American flag today. What led you to that conclusion?
Well, I'll go back to Madeleine Albright. She was famous for her pins, and I borrowed her idea years ago. She used her pins as a diplomatic tool to indicate something on her heart or in her mind about the work she was doing. And so years ago, I borrowed that idea. And Debbie Dingle noticed that every day I wear some pin, but I often wear a starfish because I believe that's really the line of work I'm in. The little parable of the little boy on the beach when all the starfish wash up, and he's walking along the beach and he's dutifully throwing them in. And an older man comes by and says, "Little boy, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm saving these starfish. They're going to dry and die up here." And the older man, he's much wiser, and he sees it's an impossible task. And he says, "Little boy, don't you see, you can't make a difference?" And of course, he picks one up, he throws it in. He said, "I made a difference for that one." So sometimes I wear my starfish pin to say, that's the line of work I'm in. I think it's the line of work you're in. We're just trying to save starfish. We won't be able to save them all. And actually, you have a beautiful expression about to save a life is to save the whole world. So I wear pins for that reason. Sometimes my husband's in the bicycle industry, so I often wear a bicycle pin. And that's a signal to, it's not only infrastructure, but safe bicycle paths, but it's also, don't take yourself so seriously. Let's have some fun out there. Let's ride some bikes. Let's do some things. Debbie Dingle, recognizing that I like pins, bought me this pin. I was wearing a Ukrainian, a little ribbon of Ukrainian flag colors, and she gave me this last month.
So if I'm reading the clock right, we really only have a few minutes left, and I want to ask just one more hot button question, but I do want to leave you a little time if you have closing remarks to the people in the room and on the Zoom. That is an expression that I'm going to borrow from you many times. My last hot button question for you, and then it's your turn to say whatever you'd like to close us out, please, is negotiations or almost negotiations with Iran and their nuclear policies are back toward the front burner again. Where are you on that issue, that existential question?
Yeah, there's another existential question and threat. I was not in Congress at the time of the voting on the signing of the Iran deal. I just believe in my heart and in my core and in every fiber of my being that Iran must not get a nuclear weapon. So I believe in the power of putting them back into an agreement. I recognize the flaws of the old agreement, but we have to get back into another JPCOA and make sure that we have stringent inspections. You've seen the briefing. They are dangerously close to achieving a nuclear weapon. We cannot let that happen on our watch. So while I know some people were pleased that the former administration tore up the agreement, I was not. I didn't think that was wise. The only future we have is through peaceful diplomacy wherever we can, and the strength of other nations in an agreement to hold Iran under control and not to have a nuclear weapon. We know the threat they are to Israel, and they're not just a threat to Israel. So I'm somebody who believes we must get back into an agreement. It must be a stronger agreement, and we have to be able to police it.
We've covered a lot of territory. We've been global in this discussion, and I thank you for being forthright, sharing your own convictions and beliefs. And before we close, because we are limited in time, it's not infinite, I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell us some last thoughts, what's on your mind, what do you want us to take home, and tell our families and friends about what we heard from you, Congresswoman.
All I'd like to say is thank you. Thank you for the chance to be with you. And for those on the Zoom, thank you for the chance to be with all of you. I don't need to tell you anything. You're involved in it. You care about justice and freedom. You care about lifting up love and putting down bigotry and hatred. You care about growing a generation of forever learners that will be partners, citizens of this world, to make sure that we protect this democracy, but also protect vulnerable democracies around the world. So there's nothing I can tell you, but thank you.
And we say thank you to you for your service and for your time and for your commitment to our country and to our community. Thank you so much.
I'd just like to say a quick word, just to close us out. Thank you all. Congresswoman Dean, thank you so much. Rabbi Sessions, Rabbi Elif. My name is Naomi Hausman. It is my privilege to serve as the Director of Institutional Advancement here at Gratz College, the nation's first oldest independent Jewish college in North America. So really is a privilege, and it just means so much for you all to be here on Zoom in the room. Representative Dean will be here for a little bit. I know she's got to get going soon, but she will be here to speak with you in the room if you have some other questions for her. But I just wanted to share a personal note that I'm a mother of a 16-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old son, and the thing that I will bring back to them that you share with us tonight is about democracy being fragile but resilience, and love is inherent in all of us, hate is not, and that elections matter at every single level. How pragmatic and perfect is that? So thank you for that, and thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you, Naomi.
Okay.